Time to welcome from Adelaide, Reverend Phyllis Grace, who's got a great story for us today. Would you welcome Phyllis? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Rod, for the informative talk on NAIDOC Week. And it's rather serendipitous because about 4 weeks ago, Rhonda asked me to do a talk for them in Brisbane, and I decided to use the same talk that I'm giving you today. And it happened to be Reconciliation Week that week. And I was supposed to do this talk for you 2 weeks ago, but for some reason my computer decided it was not going to work for me. And so we put it off until today. How serendipitous again, NAIDOC Week, because I'm sharing an Aboriginal story. From the website aboriginal-art-australia-.com, I found this and I thought it was worth sharing. The article was headed Transfer of Knowledge. Aboriginal people disclose their dreaming stories to pass on interpretive knowledge, cultural values, traditions and lore to future generations. Their myths of the dreaming are passed on through various customs such as ceremonial body painting, storytelling, song and dance. The Australian Indigenous people have over thousands of years maintained a link with the dream time and dreaming stories of the past to the present. Due to their customs and beliefs, they have sustained a rich cultural heritage. End of quote. Most of us have heard one of the versions of the rainbow serpent, which is a beautiful Aboriginal story. And I say one of the versions because there are many, many different tribes, and each have their own special versions of the beginning of life. And as far as I am aware, they are all similar and use the rainbow serpent. So today's story may be one you have not heard before. Myths and legends of most cultures can be found in their storytelling, dance, song, and art. The religious and spiritual beliefs are also found in these forms too. It is through their myths and legends that the First Nations tribes have over thousands of years maintained a link between past and present. And I believe we can learn a lot from that, as Rad's told us. The dreaming stories have been kept alive in order to transfer knowledge, as the article told us, traditions and laws from one generation to the next. Today we are going to explore one such story from the Moreton Bay tribe, and then explore how I think it relates to our own Western culture and lives, and in particular our unity teachings. I have come to realise that we have much to learn from First Nations people. Philip, my second son, works for the Murray River Basin Commission, and some years back, he and some of his work colleagues visited the First Nations people of the Coorong. I remember Phil telling us after his visit that we really have so much to learn from these people in relation to land and water management. And he has been a great advocate for this learning. James A. Cowan spent 10 years researching the myths and legends of many of the tribes around Australia, and in his book, Myths of the Dreaming, he wrote, "By its very nature, myth defies all our attempts to realise its meaning objectively." Later, he writes, the challenge lay in comparing Aboriginal myths with their counterparts in other, more recent traditions in order to uncover correspondences. As a non-Indigenous Australian, I don't know what the Indigenous people see as the underlying meaning of the story I'm going to share. However, as I read this particular story, I could see at least a couple of corresponding lessons, particularly to our unity teachings. One very distinctive aspect of the myths and legends of First Nations people is the fact that until very recent years, they were passed on verbally from generation to generation. The scriptures of most religious groups have also been passed on verbally until eventually they were written down on tablets and then book form. And of course, today we have Aboriginal stories written in books, which is what I'm sharing from today. As I read this dreaming story that tells about how the silky oak got its beautiful golden blooms, I invite you too to see what lessons you can uncover. As I mentioned earlier, this is a story from the Moreton Bay tribe and is called Tuggen Tuggen. Now, I'm not sure whether I get the pronunciation correct, but I'm saying that phonetically. So let me read the story, and it comes from a book by Pat Walker. We knew her as for many years, but she's now chooses to use the word Ogdaroo. I think I may have said that incorrectly, but anyway, you know Pat Walker's name, I'm sure. So, Tuggen Tuggen was of the Moreton Bay tribe. One day, as he was searching for food, he met, armed with his boomerang. Just let me adjust my light here. I'm finding it hard to read the small print. Armed with his boomerang, he came across a slender and very beautiful tree. I beg your pardon, I have got the right glasses on. Tuggen Tuggen fell in love with the beautiful tree. He felt that the tree was unhappy and asked what he could do to help it. The tree shook its silver leaves and said that it was cold and wanted a cloak to keep it warm and keep her trembling leaves warm. Tuggen Tuggen promised to help her. Every day he searched for a cloak to cover the beautiful tree instead of hunting for food. The elders of the tribe grew very angry with Tuggen Tuggen when he returned each day empty-handed from the hunt. At last, they told him that if he did not bring food to the tribe, he would be punished. But Tuggen Tuggen took no notice and went on searching for a cloak for his beautiful tree. And one day, the elders decided it was time for his punishment. When Tuggen Tuggen returned next to the camp, they took his boomerang from him and threw it high into the air. They told Tuggen Tuggen that since he was not using his boomerang anymore, he would no longer need it, and so they had thrown it away. And that he was now banned from the tribe. Tuggen Tuggen watched his boomerang travelling far away, out of sight, and he could not keep up. So he made up his mind to follow it and find the boomerang. For he loved his boomerang as much as he loved the tree. He travelled all across the land, looking everywhere for his boomerang, because without his boomerang, he could not feed himself. He searched and searched, and still no boomerang. But he could not hunt for himself, of course, and eventually he became very sick. Now, Biami, the very good spirit, felt sorry for Tuggen Tuggen and gave him his boomerang back. This is the last time, Tuggen Tuggen said to the tree, that I will ever throw the boomerang. Since I could not find a cloak for you, I shall throw my boomerang into the highest of your branches, and it will keep you warm and make you happy. And when he threw his boomerang, it circled the top of the tree and touched the silvery green leaves, then broke into 1,000 golden pieces that covered the tree with a beautiful cloak, which has kept the silky oak warm ever since. And we can see that beautiful golden cloak over the silky oak in the springtime. It is a magnificent tree. Let me share what I think we can learn from this sad but beautiful dreaming myth. For me, I see two possible lessons that we can learn from the story. Firstly, Tuggin was so obsessed with finding a cloak for the tree that he failed his duties as a member of his tribe and eventually suffered the consequences of his actions. The other members of the hunting party did their duty to the tribe and provided food that was shared with all members of the tribe, including Tuggin, which is one of their wonderful ways. They are very, very good at sharing their good. Tuggin allowed his love for the tree to overcome his wisdom. Love is about harmonizing, and wisdom gives us the ability to evaluate and discern. Had Tuggin activated both his ability to express love and wisdom, allowing these two powers to work together, he would also have gained an understanding that while he so wanted to help the tree to find a cloak and keep it warm, he could combine his time of hunting for food with his search for a cloak. Instead, he chose to relinquish his responsibility to his tribe, and thus he eventually suffered the harsh consequences. Yes, he died alone, but he was happy that he had been able to provide the tree with not just any cloak, but a golden cloak, which we can still admire and enjoy today. One writer said of the silky oak that it made the blossoms made the tree glow. If you've ever seen one, it is beautiful, particularly when the sun is shining on it. I imagine Tuggin was a young man, and I love the way that Charles Fillmore expressed the way, as young people, we can get attached to outcomes that result in unwanted experiences. He wrote in Mysteries of Genesis, and I quote, "In the days of our youth, we idolize the material world and attach our spiritual faculties to the things of senses. This attachment becomes so complete that we no longer use our spiritual faculties for their proper function on the spiritual plane. This results in abnormal conditions, and a balance must be restored. The law of reaction sets in, and there is a flood of seeming adverse experiences." And end quote. And there have been times in my own life when I have been out of balance, not only because I did not use my power of wisdom to help me discern if my love for something or someone was in my very best interest, but there were many other areas in life that I wanted to enjoy, but didn't use my 12 powers appropriately, and I suffered the consequences. If our life activities are well balanced, our lives are enjoyable, and you might say that life is heavenly. If one area of our life is given too much attention at the expense of all others, which is what we saw in Tuggin's life, it will be hell on earth. I'm sure he went through hell on earth as he was searching for his boomerang. I was unaware that, like most people, I guess, that I had innate abilities that I could use at my discretion, until, of course, I came into unity. Yes, I knew about love and hate. I knew about wisdom and judgment, power and zeal, etc. But it was not until I studied the unity teachings, and in particular the 12 powers, that I truly understood the importance of using them in a very balanced, positive way. So the first message that I got from this beautiful but sad dreaming was the importance of keeping our life's activities balanced. And this story specifically reminds us as metaphysicians that wisdom is an important companion to love. I would also suggest that imagination was missing from Tuggan's life, because he could not see beyond his desire to provide warmth for the beautiful but cold tree. With imagination, he may have realised that he could both provide food for his tribe while looking for a cloak for the tree. Second lesson that I saw in this story was that I wondered if Tuggan realised, as he threw his boomerang for the very last time, that he had in his possession, or at all times, that which could provide the tree with its golden cloak. Yes, up until his boomerang was taken from him and thrown far out of sight by the elders, he was actually carrying the means to provide a cloak for the tree. Did he reflect on his actions for which he was now suffering the consequences while he searched for his beloved boomerang in order to feed himself? I wonder. Or was it only as he threw the boomerang high into the tree that the realisation came? We will never know, but you can draw your own conclusion. Again, we see that within us is the wisdom, understanding, will and power to do those things that we desire. So often we look at the problem instead of seeing possible solutions. And this is where imagination, zeal are our good companions. If we open our minds and hearts to the Christ consciousness that is within all people, regardless of race, colour, or belief. Oh, here was something else I realised as I was writing this story, writing this talk. The story reminded me of the eldest son of the story of the prodigal son, which we find in Luke 15:11-32. He too didn't realise he had everything he needed right there where he was, although he could not see that because he held on to resentment towards his younger brother and father, whom he considered was working him like a slave. And of course, the younger brother had gone off and had a good life and then came back and was showered with all sorts of wonderful things. We all have access to everything we need in a manner that is beneficial to all, but the older brother hadn't seen that in the story of the prodigal son. Had Tuggan let go of his attachment to finding a cloak for him, he may have seen the solution well before the unfortunate consequences he suffered. Charles Fillmore tells us that we must dismiss all prejudices based on our mixed perceptions and open our minds to a clearer understanding when we look within for possible solutions. When we hold on to attachment to our outcomes, we open ourselves up to disappointment. As Charles said, we must dismiss those prejudices and open our minds to the many possibilities that may just be waiting for us to uncover. Who knows, we may get a very pleasant surprise and experience a simply better outcome than we ever envisaged. Everyone can experience the consequences of imbalance in their lives when their focus is turned in one direction instead of using their 12 innate abilities. You see, when we give attention to our desires at the expense of our well-being, we are unable to see when we are unhealthily attached to outcomes. This will create great imbalance, which will eventually cause us suffering, very unnecessary suffering. I encourage you to explore some of the myths of the dreaming, as they give us a good insight to the culture, laws, spirituality, and knowledge of the First Nation people. James G. Cowan, in his book about the myths of the dreaming, wrote, "For these make up the real treasury of knowledge from which we must draw if we are to restore the balance between humankind and nature." I would add that a greater understanding of the myths of the dreaming would help create a greater understanding between all people of this great land in which we live. God bless you.
Would you thank Reverend Phyllis? Thank you. Isn't it great to hear these stories and the wonderful similarities that occur? Let's keep that